my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm doing a big January New Year book unhaul. Out with the old, make room for the new. Variety of different sort of categories of things here. To start, I am going to get rid of two vintage sci-fi mass market paperbacks. These were both gifts from someone. I did read them. I think they were both, I don't remember what I rated them, but I'm not interested in keeping them around to reread them in the future. The first is The Revolving Boy by Gertrude Friedberg, which is, I guess, a lesser known vintage sci-fi title. Let's see when this is from. 1966. I read this a number of years ago and I remember so little about it. It did not stick with me at all. My second of these might be a bit more controversial because this is a sci-fi classic, but it is The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. I am glad that I read this and I have an understanding of where this fits in genre history, but honestly, this is not my type of book and I'm never gonna read it again. Next are a couple of 3-star reads that have sat on my shelves for a few years because I was hesitant to get rid of them, but I've finally come to the decision that the reasons I was keeping them were not good enough. The first is 1,000 Beginnings and Endings, which is a YA anthology edited by Ellen O. and Elise Chapman. This is a collection of stories inspired by Asian mythology. And even though there are some authors in here of interest to me, none of these stories were real standouts to me. I kept it thinking that, oh, because this has all of these little introductions about the mythology and how these authors were interpreting it, I might want to refer back to this later, and it's just no longer worth the space on my shelf for me. Also, because this is YA, I'm not really the target audience for it, and someone else is gonna appreciate this better. This second one might be a little controversial. It's Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. I remember this being a really page-turner of a read for me, and so I thought that even though I only gave this 3 stars, I might want to continue on with the series. It turned out by the time the second book was released, I just wasn't that interested anymore, and now it looks like the series is never going to be finished. The series may never be finished, and so I feel pretty confident that, you know, if I ever want to go back to this series, I can library them. I don't need to keep this on my shelves. Another 3-star read that I sort of knew I wasn't going to keep my copy of the moment I finished it was, this one might be a little controversial. This might be a hot take, Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This was fine. It was just fine. It wasn't a standout to me in any way. I don't need to keep this on my shelves. I did think when I read it that I was going to read the bonus story in the back of this edition, and I haven't done that yet. I might still try to do that before I get rid of it. I was, I think, reading this during the Hugo voting period, and so I was trying to get through a lot of things really quickly, and I didn't have time to stop and read bonus stories. I might still do that. I might read other things by this author in the future. Don't need to keep this one. It's a little more painful to get rid of books that were once 5-star favorites for you that you're never going to read again, but I am getting rid of Cruel Beauty by Rosamund Hodge. This is YA, and it's a fairy tale mythology mashup of a book. This gets described as a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but it's not just Beauty and the Beast. There are other things in there. I originally read this when I was straight out of college. I got it from the library. I loved it. The way it mashed up the fairy tale influences sort of blew my little mind. And I bought this used copy afterwards on the assumption that I would one day want to reread this. I have since learned that this author holds some anti-abortion views that I cannot get on board with. I think I would also have less patience for the sort of angsty YA romantasy of this. if I read it again. So I'm just not going to read it again. I'm going to leave the positive memories of it in the past and move on to newer, better things. The next category of books I'm getting rid of is ARCs. ARCs, if you don't know, are advanced reader copies. I have not ever been in the habit of requesting them from publishers because I have limited space in my apartment, and getting rid of them can be ethically tricky. You're not supposed to sell them. That's not like legally enforceable in any way, but the author doesn't get any money from them. They are given away by the publisher for free, so it is very bad manners to try to profit off of them yourself in any way. So if you don't have someone in your life or some like book trade arrangement going on with friends that you can give those books to, it can be difficult to unload unwanted ARCs. Fortunately, there is one really great way to get rid of them, and that's little free libraries. Up until very recently, I did not have one anywhere near me. Recently, though, I have a new little free library in my neighborhood. I'm very excited, and I'm gonna get rid of some ARCs. So the first one I'm getting rid of is Mirage by Somaiya Daud. I did read this. I think I rated it 3 stars. I don't think I ever reviewed it or really discussed it on this channel. This is YA, and it is like science fantasy in the sort of Star Wars mold, but with a Middle Eastern cultural setting. I don't remember if there was anything that was explicitly fantasy about it. I think there was something at the end that maybe felt like it could have gone that direction in book 2, or like maybe it wasn't. I never read the sequel. I thought this was fine. Would be totally fine recommending this to a teenager looking for this sort of book. It's about a girl who gets like stolen away by the Empire to become the princess's body double because she's like a perfect lookalike for this princess. This was just a situation where like by the time the second book was released, I had lost interest. Another YA book that I did review on this channel, I do have that video review somewhere, is Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst. This was YA fantasy, and it stood out at the time by being a like sapphic fantasy romance that was not common in YA when this was published. This was published in 2016. I remember having a really good time with it, but it was pretty generic, and that was fine. Like, I enjoyed it as a generic fantasy read. But fortunately, sapphic romance is no longer a super rarity in YA fantasy, and I just don't think I'm ever going to want to go back and revisit this one. And then the last print arc I'm getting rid of is probably actually not going in the little free library because I might have a friend that I can give this to who hasn't read this series yet. I am getting rid of this one not because I've lost interest in it in the years since I've read it, but because I do have a finished copy as well. So if and when I reread it, I will be rereading the finished copy, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. And I do intend to reread this series. I never read book 3 in this series, and this is like a sad emotional story that I won't linger on too much, but my mom and I were both really enjoying these books together, and then she died like right around the time of the release of the third book. So I never read it because then at the time, like, I was too emotionally wrapped up in the idea that this was my mom's most anticipated book and she wasn't going to get to read it. I now think I'm enough years past that I want to go back and reread this series so I can finally read the third book. But I do have finished copies of books 1 and 2 now, so I don't need to keep this arc. It is a duplicate. And then this last one here, I try really hard to not be in a position where I'm getting rid of books I haven't read, because that makes me feel bad. It makes me feel like I did my book shopping wrong. I bought something that I was never going to read. Like, how did I misjudge so badly? Like, I have a lot of books that I haven't been in the mood to read for years, that I still think I might read someday. I'm not getting rid of them. That's my library of potential book reading for all of my moody whims. But for me to actually say like, no, I'm not going to read this, I feel like I have to have misjudged myself badly at some point in the past. So this is actually an audiobook CD that I bought at a used bookstore and didn't realize at the time it was an advanced listening copy that shouldn't have been at a used bookstore. It says it like really, really small on the back, like you can miss that very easily. But this is Landline by Rainbow Rowell. Why did I ever think I was going to want to listen to an audiobook of Landline by Rainbow Rowell? Like, this must have been really cheap. Clearly, I got this enough years ago that Rainbow Rowell was still like one of the hot authors on BookTube, and I was trying to read like hot BookTube authors. But this isn't even one of the ones that like her fans were ever really big on. It's adult. It's about like a couple whose marriage is falling apart, who end up talking to like versions of their significant other from different times in their relationship on the telephone. So like mildly speculative, but otherwise like contemporary general fiction. I have less than zero interest in this book, and I'm sure someone is going to be thrilled to find an audiobook CD in the Little Free Library, because that's where it's going. Next is a big series, and this is one that like is sort of painful, but it's been coming for a long time. I have kind of known for several years that I would not be rereading these books, probably, that I would be getting rid of them. But I've held off saying like I'll get rid of them when I need the shelf space. And it is time. I need the shelf space. And this is the entire Lunar Chronicles series by Marissa Meyer, including the novella and the story collection. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books. I'm not gonna hold this up. They're sitting here in my lap while I talk about this. So many of us on BookTube, from a certain era of BookTube, yes, but also just like in BookTube in general, I feel like this happens to people who are newer to spaces like BookTube as well, have like a series, often a YA series, that like got us back into reading and into like bookish fan spaces. And for me, after I graduated from college and had been reading for fun very, very little over those years while I was in college, that was this series, the Lunar Chronicles. They are YA, sci-fi, fairy tale retelling mashup books, but also kind of this like dystopian overthrow the evil government epic. And I was really into some but not all of the characters, some but not all of the plot lines. And at the time, that was kind of all I needed to be like deeply invested. I think in retrospect, aspects of the world building do not hold up well. There's definitely been criticism, I think is totally valid, of the sort of unified Asian nation that the first book is set in, and how kind of ridiculous and how little sense that makes. But for a long time, I still thought I would want to revisit this series one day for funsies to see if it held up, even though the answer would probably be no. And the moment when I realized I wasn't going to do that was during the pandemic, when I thought back on this series and I was like, wait, there was a plague in those books. And it didn't make any sense, this plague. Like, none of the things people were doing about the plague made any sense. People were going to a royal ball in the middle of a mystery plague that, like, no one knew how it was spreading, with no disease mitigation efforts. And at that point, I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna reread those books. I have a full series review of these from, like, when, I guess, the 4th book was new. I don't remember. Was the short story collection out? I have no idea. I did a series review of these back in the day. It is still on my channel. It still gets views occasionally. I think I would probably, I haven't rewatched that video recently. I would probably stand by of most of whatever I said in that video. I don't think I believed it to be like a greater work of literature than it is. It's just that what I'm looking for in my reading has changed. And then the last set of books I am getting rid of is less painful for me, actually, and that is books by Neil Gaiman. I'm sorry to people who are going through this right now for whom this is like a painful thing. It sucks to learn that authors or artists of any kind that you look up to have done shitty things. I don't have very many Neil Gaiman books. I have exactly 3 of them, and I'm getting rid of them. The only one of these that I've read is Stardust. This, I am glad that I read it in the past and have it as a point of reference, because I think this is an important, like, literary reference point for a lot of fantasy about, like, journeys into the land of Fae, that, you know, is a very specific niche subgenre that I have some, you know, specific interest in. It's much darker than the movie. I'm glad that I understand that. At this point, I am just not going to reread it. And then I have 2 books of his that I haven't read. The first is Neverwhere. You can tell from the sticker that I got this from Strand for 48 cents. They no longer sell mass market paperbacks for 48 cents at Strand. I think they cost at least $1. This is another one that I sort of felt like I wanted to read as a reference point for other fantasy published since then that is similar to this in certain ways. But at this point, like, I'm not going to read it even for that. I'm gonna take a little detour to mention something that I don't really talk about, which is that I kind of have 2 tiers of, like, authors I don't promote on my social media. There are authors that I won't read. And at this point, Neil Gaiman has become an author I won't read just for myself, for the fact that I don't think I can sit through this book and make myself read it, right? And then there are other authors that are in a gray zone for me where I won't talk about them on social media, but that doesn't mean that if I, like, already own books of theirs, I'll never read them. I have books on this TBR shelf that I intend to read, and I intend to not post about them on Goodreads, on, you know, YouTube, on any social media when I do read them. So when you see me unhauling books that I have not yet read by an author, that is a more extreme step for me than the norm. And then the third Neil Gaiman book that I own is another one that I haven't read, but it's tiny. It is this little essay, illustrated, called Art Matters. I think it was maybe like a speech he gave or something that is heavily illustrated in this edition by Chris Riddle, whose art I do like, so this is a bummer. But this is like a little inspirational thing, not something I was super enthused about to begin with, but this was given to me as a gift. And now if this person ever asks me if I read it, I will have to come up with an excuse why I did not. So that's it. That's my New Year book unhaul. I only ever started, like, posting unhaul videos for the first time a year ago. Was my first unhaul video I posted, and I think this is my second. Maybe I'll keep doing one a year. Anyhow, let me know what you think of these books that I'm getting rid of. I hope you're having a very nice day. That is all. Bye for now.